Welcome to another episode of the Chris Rod Max Show. And every week I'm joined here with Max and Rod to talk about the latest news, the latest developments in AI. And also, like today, we're going to deep dive into really interesting topics and developments. Hi guys, how are you today?
Fantastic. Hi everyone. Good to see you.
It's great.
Perfect. So what's going on this week? So we got and saw an announcement of Nvidia collaborating with Accenture. And I want to deep dive into how you guys evaluate this development. I also want to talk about the new release of the Facebook or Meta video AI capability ahead of OpenAI's development of Sora, which was announced a year ago. And I also want to talk a little bit about next investment frontiers. We spoke and speak a lot about the newest investments into the AI field, such as the large investment into OpenAI last week. I think it amounted to about 157 billion in new fresh investment. But why don't we also look into some adjacent markets, especially the energy or data center perspective, and see what are some of the new developments in these adjacent areas. So anyways, maybe let me start with you, Max, working more on the business side. Again, there's this Accenture Nvidia collaboration announced. I think they are looking into training the Accenture consultants to essentially help to facilitate adoption of AI technologies in enterprises and I suppose also Accenture. How do you look at this?
I think overall, it's a positive development, I guess, for the industry in general. For the longest time, all these consultants, I would say, the Accentures of the world, or even the MBBs and their digital arm of the world, has been helping large enterprises to augment their team when it comes to delivery of some of this, technology. I think with AI, given that it's a new technology, I don't think it'll be very different from an adoption perspective, right? Because people tend to stick to what they know. So larger enterprises will, one way or another, lean on some of these consultants to help deliver their capabilities. And what's interesting is, building on top of Nvidia's capabilities, kind of just create I would say more of a verticalized, skill for Accenture, where you have a lot of best practices where you can get from one large enterprise to another large enterprise. I think to a certain extent, over time, Accenture will either be the first to be very good at that, which they have done previously when it comes to digital delivery specifically. Overall, I think it's a positive thing to develop. My sense is if they're going down this route over time, they will probably get some Gen AI application that they could deliver for the entire industry, which I believe in the article that you shared, they have done it for manufacturing, for example. So it's a positive development, at least based on what I understand, and also from what I heard from, I guess, CIO's needs.
Definitely. And it really does seem like one of the biggest pain points we have discussed also on our show is not necessarily the technology behind AI, but rather like the people behind adopting them, and that being a really big cultural and also business barrier to adopting these kind of new, technologies and developing use cases. And it seems like Accenture, with Nvidia's help and training their professionals, could actually make the difference in helping enterprise navigate these different challenges along adopting the technology. Now, Rod, coming to you, and maybe from a technical point of view, do you believe that this particular partnership with Nvidia is helpful, or do you think Accenture should have partnered with another player? What are your 2 cents on that?
Well, I do think that because Nvidia is the strongest player, the strongest brand and so on, doing this, regardless of how well it's executed, what happens and so on, it always gives a awareness, highlights the Accenture brand, because we should remember that they are also competing with BCG, McKinsey, etc. All of them, they're really getting into the AI game. If you look at reports, they're saying services related to IT, digitalization, AI, and so on, they're the main growth drivers in the consulting environment. So as a result, if Accenture gets to have this partnership with Nvidia, this is definitely something that sets them apart. I would also say that This is something that we've seen in the various waves of AI. If I recall, for example, in 2015, 2016, also all consultancies, they were trying to offer some AI related services of the day. Back then it was a little bit more in the chatbot area and so on. Because in the end, if we think about one of the things that people have said over the decades is that with the rise of search, with search engines and so on, the need for consultants will decrease, right? So what is at its core consultancy? It is having, let's say, like a small expert in your business who comes and tells you what to do, who provides this knowledge that is not available to you as a business and helps you make better decisions. But we think now what happens with, of course, with Google over already multiple decades, but things such as Perplexity AI, where you can ask specific information and then have it condensed, but more and more with model capabilities related to reasoning and structured step taking, then in a sense, you already have next to you like an AI consultant. They say, hey, these are like my documents. Should we go in this direction or in this other direction and so on? So how can these service businesses stay relevant? Well, through this type of edge technologies where, for example, the clients, let us consider a heavy industry. If you are an industry such as metallurgy in Indonesia and you want to do AI, it is very unlikely that a top expert will come to you because you are likely not in a hub. You're also likely maybe like in a smaller town, also the industry. Plus on top, you don't have the brand, right? And then through this consultancy, you can bring top talent to you to develop solutions unique for you.
Yes, I would agree with you, Rod. And if I look at this consulting space, I think BCG and McKinsey were the first to really quickly strike collaborations with OpenAI to develop their own LLM in partnership. And I think the use case is really there where more on the, okay, let's try knowledge management. It's kind of like a wiki to like look through all these different PowerPoints and documents and so forth. And it seems like Accenture now with an Nvidia and a hardware partnership, they are really more, or this is at least my hunch, more looking into selling more infrastructure project. And it makes sense because I think one of the biggest enterprise problems you have with AI adoption is, okay, what's the right infrastructure? How are you supposed to think about your solution architect? How are you supposed to think about your capability uptake and the holistic approach towards your AI strategy, your implementation, your hardware, your infrastructure? And it seems like this is really creating a new value proposition for Accenture. I think the second thought I had when I looked at this was how consulting companies also right now have it a bit more difficult, I would say. I think 50 years ago, where there was no internet, you had these experts being employed by these consulting companies, bringing out additional value to a business owner, for example, on supply chain or whatnot. With the advent of internet, obviously, what is your real edge? And I think lots of strategic decisions, people decisions are then outsourced towards. And I think there was a wave where in 2014, 15, this was really the rise of innovation consulting companies or venture builders, etc. And now it seems like there's this like new frontier of like AI and how do we bring it actually to the people? And I do believe that also, this doesn't seem like, the next little, let's say, trend that startups can just follow and then build new services on top. But it seems to be like this big gun, big player kind of game, such as we saw this big rise or raise of OpenAI last week.
So it was pretty much on. So you were very early. Actually, you were saying innovation consultancy and so on. You were really at the beginning of that, and I'm sure that you still have an ear on the market, an ear on the industry. Maybe like you even have like some backstage information of what's happening. You've seen similar trends rising up, and then you can make a comparison. What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
I think this is interesting time because we're also talking about a post-COVID era, right? And I think during COVID, so many things happened. I mean, we saw the rise and fall of food delivery stocks. We saw anything that's related with home, really being successful, and things that are more in the office maybe going down in terms of stock performance as a measure of like how well do businesses do. And I think also during that time, during COVID, consulting companies were hiring like crazy, right? Because so many companies were looking to restructure. So many companies were overwhelmed with remote work. So you have a couple of effects currently, or, that ran concurrently. And now you have also AI. And I think now this is where you always have a bit of a delay of effects. So now the consultancies are more in a state where they're sort of like trying to like right size the organization again, trying to see how they can also automate some of the processes. And I think one interesting thing is also like, do people or do companies right now have the budgets for consulting companies? And I think this is something where you have currently a couple of geopolitical debates and discussions going on, and also a couple of wars, and also an interest rate environment that's also a little bit more unclear, is definitely not adding to wanting to spend a lot of like budget on outside services. I think that's like the general mood. And I'd be also super interested in your opinion, Max, on this. But I think another article that I share with you is this whole argument and discussion around software budgets being right-sized or downsized. And obviously this is also, something I would love to discuss with you guys, also with respect to Accenture and Nvidia trying to like come up with a new value proposition and to be valuable to companies. Max, what are your thoughts on that?
I think before we go into the software, I think I want to echo a couple of points. I think you mentioned, a few interesting points. Number one, at the back of COVID, obviously the consulting proposition hasn't gone away yet, but it kind of just tapered off a little bit. I think this already started, I remember maybe 2019, where a lot of large organizations have some sort of preferred vendor list. Instead of having all the top consulting companies selling to them, they almost always have like a list of amount of consultants and the amount of money they want to spend with consultants. I think, that will probably continue to happen when it comes to streamlining from that perspective. And then second thing, I guess, around consultancy is the value proposition itself. A lot of the times, some of this, what this consultant sells are knowledge and sometimes capabilities, ability to augment existing teams. I've seen consultants actually get dropped into, the business lines, or they just quit the consulting life and then just went into the industry. And because of the knowledge that they carry, they kind of just bring that over. I think with this Accenture ability to build on top of, I would say, hardwares, it kind of just, help, I would say, accelerate the amount of learnings. Because out of that, 57,000 people they say they're going to train, and 30,000 business people, that's about 10% of Accenture's workforce, right? 743,000, if I'm not wrong. And a lot of them will probably ended up in enterprises. Hence why I mentioned it's actually a good thing. The more they learn the best practices, the more they will get deployed into their respective business lines, I would say, business area, where AI could really take off a lot quicker. So I would say in the long term, it's actually better. In the medium term, I agree with you. How would CIO think about spending more money with consulting? I guess it's a puzzle to everybody, because everyone is cutting costs, right? If you're big enough, unless you're tech companies where, technically you have unlimited money tap.
I was exactly something that you're saying, Max, from the SaaS perspective on large organizations trying to cut the number of vendors. For example, if you look at a large organization, how many vendors they have for software, it goes in the hundreds. So there are, for example, studies from companies like Okta that manage all these access to different software vendors centralized. And they report that the average large company has more than 200 systems that are logging to from external vendors. And so you're saying, so if companies go through their budgets and say, hey, can we reduce these 200 to maybe 20, 30? Another thing that I was thinking on this Accenture and Nvidia partnership is also the focus that they're trying to give it around agents. That in this show, we talk about agents almost every week, right? So where we need on one side, this is real. So like the agent trend is happening. So things are getting not only smarter, but also models are able to sort of collaborate in tasks, cooperate to achieve larger outcomes. But also at the same time, there's a lot of marketing, a lot of so having delays and grades where now if you're a consultancy and say, hey, I want to sell you any type of document processing, any type of like chat with your data, then companies, large companies will say, I've already seen that. We're already having some initiatives in that space. We're already collaborating with some people. So then what do you need to do? Well, you need to come with the next thing, right? And say, hey, now let's do agents. And then they will say, hey, this is new to us. It sounds exciting. This has the potential of maybe reducing our overhead. Let's give it a try.
Definitely. And maybe just piggybacking on this also, the second article that I shared with you guys is on software by Andreessen Horowitz. And basically that selling software these days is really hard. And obviously this article is written towards SaaS startups and sort of like how they can actually win in it. But also here, some of the statistics that I found very interesting is that private enterprise software growth has actually deaccelerated from 112% in 21 and dropped to 60% in 23. And also there, I mean, some of the things that we just discussed have also been mentioned, like consolidation after post-COVID. I think Gen AI, again, is a competitor factor. So more AI startups are now going into the same field. Then you also have the macroeconomic uncertainty that's also not really 100% clear. What do you guys make out of this article? And perhaps also maybe from a startup perspective, would you agree with the article? What's your take on it?
I can say it's very real. I've been going to a couple of conferences of data vendors, of adjacent industries that historically were separated from the machine learning AI space. And they didn't really have a need to be close to it, offer anything related because it was its own thing. The buyers will say, hey, we need this for data processing pipelines. We need this for storage and so on. And now it's all over on AI capabilities, copilot, enhanced AI process and so on and so forth. Because they're also noticing the squeeze. They're also noticing we need to be seen as AI companies, AI first companies. This article that you shared, Chris, also mentions this competition from AI first entrants, where not only is about here the consumers of SaaS software are calling the list of vendors, but also looking at saying, hey, can we get providers that offers AI at its core that have AI capabilities? And then they're looking into these AI first providers, right? And you're thinking, hey, should I take a legacy database or one of the newer ones that are targeted towards AI? And of course, if you're a legacy database, like the Oracles or Postgres of this world, you need to come up with some AI functionality to stay relevant and competitive in the discussion.
I think it's definitely harder. If I were to sit from a software buyer perspective, let's say a CIO, why do they buy software? Ultimately, three things, right? Either you increase revenue, reduce costs, or reduce risk. Indirectly, it kind of just tied to the three motivating factors on the article that talk a little bit about why there's a shrinking software spend. Macroeconomic uncertainty has a lot to do with revenue. Post-COVID SaaS consolidation has a lot to do with costs. Early innings of Gen AI is just risk, right? Like you just don't know if you buy software today, whether or not Gen AI will just replace it tomorrow. After you sign like a contract for like 3-4 years. And if I were to think from that context, from a CIO perspective, if you think about CIO, they nowadays, I think about 5, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, CIO wasn't even really part of the C-suite conversation. A lot of large banks, large organizations don't even have like a tech person on the board, let alone the C-suite. And now with better understanding of software and also better understanding of Gen AI, I feel like a lot of these CIO are become a lot more pickier. And they have a lot of problems they need to solve for today with their existing infrastructure problems, existing applications. But at the same time, they need to, think ahead about how to compete from their specific businesses or industry. I think, I spoke to a CIO. Basically, he said that if you want to sell to me, there are about 37 metrics that he will present to the C-suite. The question is how your software, your Gen AI software, whatever it is, move those metrics. And it doesn't have to move one. One may not be, super relevant, maybe 2 or 3 of those 37 metrics. Because like it or not, a lot of them are probably of equal importance. So having that context when you sell to some of this CIO, it's about understanding what on that 37 metrics are they presenting. If one person, whomever is selling, can get their hands on that, then you have a very good idea on how you're folding all the way up, how you're actually affecting the CIOs immediately. I think leave that alone itself. There's also a software fatigue, if you will, right? A lot of people are calling up CIOs, calling up CTOs. It's like, dude, we have this new, I don't know, new cool CRM tool with entirely Gen AI running. It's gonna beat Salesforce. It's gonna change your world. When you say something like that, a CIO will be like, "How are you gonna change my world?" And more often than not, if your first pitch is to tell them you're going to change their world without showing them, they're going to shut you down immediately because they don't have time for this. So I guess my general sense is really about, which the article talk about, finding that pocket of opportunity for you to show value, and at the same time not losing the bigger picture on how you could help CIO move a lot of their KPIs that matter to them. I guess those are my general 2 cents on I guess selling in to enterprise software in general.
Yes, now I want to say that, so about what Max was saying is that really putting ourselves in the shoes of the CIOs. In general, in large organizations, what you want is continuity, you want reliability. You're not thinking in adopting the latest AI tool. So you're not really, okay, the name might have something related to. So CIO, you could call it so like information or innovation, depending how you want to see it. But really in the IT departments of large organizations, it is not very high in the priority list, this topic of innovation. It's more about thinking, how can we have systems that are reliable and then they will be still running 20, 30 years from now. So a lot of also this push on one side, reducing vendors and also bringing AI first technology and so on, come more from the line of business, where the line of business on one side is reducing their costs. Very often or almost always the budget for these tools, it comes from this line of businesses. So as a result, if they have to reduce costs, they will cut here and then the CIO will have to consolidate the contracts. But also at the same time, they will say, hey, we're seeing all these fantastic stories about Klarna, for example. They reduce costs, they streamline things and so on. Where is the AI offering for us? What are you offering us? And very often the CIO will say, well, we have something in the pipeline and it's set for like 2028 or something like this. Yeah. So we'll be collaborating with, let's say, AWS or one of these large cloud providers. And then these departments, this line of businesses will say, hey, we cannot wait until 2028, 2029. So then on their side, they will try to look for solutions, like point solutions, or they will say either we adopt this now as a bridge, or if we just will adopt the technology directly. So always in these IT departments, there is this clash between depending on the budget from this line of businesses, but also on balancing between innovation and bringing the latest tools, but having this reliability and continuity, thinking that this software needs to still be running in 2, 3, 4 decades.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just to add to that, right? You mentioned about, understanding what is it they need for today versus what kind of budget is allocated to innovation. I think if you're selling to a public company, more often than not, they would talk about how much budget is being put into some sort of, well, I can only think from financial services. They normally have like a X amount of budget for change the bank, X amount of budget for running the bank. That kind of gives you a good sense on where when you're selling to a large organization, where your money is going to come from. And I do think the balancing act within the confinement of corporate politics is always fun. So there's also a need to get, like, I would say, sponsors internally, but making sure that you're helping your sponsor to get, I would say, promoted as quickly as possible. It's almost like an unwritten rule when you're selling to a large corporate, helping your sponsor, your CIO, to look good in front of their peers, for example. It's almost like the sole goal. Yeah, and to do that is basically helping them to deliver on their metric and whatever their promises are.
Thank you both. I think very interesting thoughts that you're bringing us here. And maybe just to summarize some of the things that we discussed today on this particular topic. So first, of course, we see that consulting companies, the advisors to bigger enterprises, are now gearing up, getting also their capabilities upskilled. In this case, we saw Accenture and Nvidia partnering. My hypothesis being that they will definitely try to sell more infrastructural kind of projects to enterprises, which also most likely makes sense because right now everyone talks about AI, but most of the companies are very sensitive about their data. they want to find ways to keep it in-house. They want to use the AI capabilities to run better their operations and bring better products to the market. This is also coupled with the second article we just discussed, which is that it is much, much harder to sell software these days, also because spends are smaller. Most likely they're also allocated more towards these AI infrastructural projects. And in general, as you pointed out, Max, the requirements to actually get the foot into the door is also getting harder and harder. So I think the takeaways, if a startup is listening here today, is obviously to make sure that burn rates are calculated well and for a good long period, because it's taking more time to obviously do the sale. And I think for enterprises, it's really about kind of getting a balance between the licenses and the license cost associated with that on the software side, as well as thinking about what AI infrastructure capabilities you need to build up. Great. So moving on to the next topic, and it's really a news that I thought was very curious. It's about Meta's announcement of a Gen AI video capability. And I think the reason this is something that I picked up was because I remember very well last year, Sora was announced, and it was this amazing video making tool that OpenAI had promised to the world. Basically, based on one sentence of prompt, you would get an entire video clip, which would obviously be super relevant for sectors such as advertising or marketing. Now, I don't know, have you guys tried the Meta AI one? Have you guys seen videos? Maybe Rod, from your technical perspective, what's your take on it?
Well, the tool is not yet there, as far as I know. Maybe something has changed in the last hours. Things move very fast. But so pretty much what we have available is we have a website, so that we have here on our screen. It has a very nice set of animations, and there are also some videos around on how this can work in practice, as we see now. And there is also a publication explaining how this is done. But we have not been able to try it. So I feel it's similar situation to, in the cases you were saying, Chris, with OpenAI Sora. So where they announce it, and now for almost a year, we have not seen anything live. Because in the end, so video is very computationally intensive. It's also very difficult to get it. And as you see here, for example, with, in this case, another small sample of what is supposed to be generated by this tool, this is not some pixelated low resolution, but it looks very high quality, very high resolution, and this is not trivial. So I'm not sure. So how we look in practice, I suspect that, as is also often the case with, so in large organizations and in the AI space, there is always a race. There's a race to be the latest. There's also a race to stay relevant. And Meta has had this pressure. So already so for a couple of years on, they were heavily criticized by their investors for spending so much on the metaverse. So now they have shifted completely into the AI space and so on. So they need to continue showing, hey, AI for us is the future, and ideally trying to bridge it with the other technologies. We met metaverse. We discussed in one of our episodes briefly how they now have these glasses that are connecting, they're bridging the technology between augmented reality, extended reality with AI and so on. So on paper, it looks amazing. It looks the idea of, as you were saying, Chris, have a prompt and then have a short video that is high resolution. But how the tool will work, it remains to be seen.
I think when it comes to video, I think I'm a little bit more on the positive and application side. If it can work, that would be great. My sense is with Meta, they're probably going to push it out onto their current platforms. So I would say, your Facebook, your Instagram. So if it do come, it'll be quite interesting to see. I think last week we talked a little bit about this on, what is the downside case for OpenAI, for example. One of it was, having larger, I would say, gatekeepers of the internet deploying their own model on their own application. So that will, kind of just take away, I wonder, will it take away, I think, time spent on things like OpenAI onto, just back to Instagram, really. So if that were to happen, I wonder what will happen to, I guess, OpenAI and their Sora's development. But again, at the same time, I think for OpenAI, they're also trying to go after enterprises where you have a lot more money. So it may not be, very relevant for D2C, but it may be relevant for B2B. I think that's, I guess, generally what I think. And then number two, when it comes to the AI, I think it's really cool. It's just, I think even the article itself, Zuckerberg mentioned that, we have to be able to watermark it when it comes to whether or not this data is authentic. For example, one thing that I could think of is, for us, has been doing this video, can we use this as a way to edit our video down the line? I'll be quite excited about that. Or can we add to what we already have today, or edited video, and add some extra, I would say, elements to it? If it can, that is, quite exciting. To a certain extent, we would want people to know it's somehow generated by AI, but at the same time, you do not want that to be extremely, I guess, apparent, simply because you want to try to blend into your existing video as clearly as possible. So I think it's yet to be seen how it will be applied, but I am generally quite excited about it, I must say. I'm a very visual person.
I agree with you entirely, Max. So I was thinking that, so exactly these use cases you were discussing, one that I see is maybe not necessarily for video creation from scratch, but rather so enhancing existing videos. So one mega trend that pretty much is in all investors' thesis and so on in B2C internet is this rise of the content creator. And then you have all type of individuals creating video. For example, in our case, us, right? We're doing so here is podcasts, and very often these are talking head videos, right? So like people just talking and so on, discussing, and you might want to have so what is called B-roll, and have these extra images just to make something clear. So you're talking about, in our last vacations, we were at the beach and we saw this and so on. And then as we see here in our screens, you can make this much clearer, much more impactful by just prompting person in the beach playing with some fire by the ocean or something. And we must remember that very often people who create videos who are either on YouTube or on Instagram, they are not professional creators. They are not so experts in video editing. And also, of course, they will not have the tool or the access to create this extra footage. So having tools like that will be fantastic.
Guys, I'm actually just projecting ourselves sitting here in 20 years doing our podcast every week still. And kind of like maybe recalling or replaying some of the older episodes, like the one that we're doing today. And, we're talking about hippos flowing in water, koalas surfing, and all AI generated. I think if I were to think about 20 years down the road, it's probably all very, very mainstream. And we wouldn't even know if it's AI or not AI, or we wouldn't even talk about people being professional in video making or not, because actually I think the borders and lines are going to be blurred on this front. But I think one curious question I would have to the two of you guys when it comes to Meta or Facebook, which I accidentally used at the beginning of our show. But do you guys think this is maybe an alley, this capability that they are now building to get to a state of metaverse? And the reason I'm asking is because you're basically creating a virtual world. Could you do this? Or do you guys believe that this might be one way they're thinking about getting to this metaverse state kind of end game? And will we be there in 20 years?
If we look into the future, if we're trying to do predictions, I do think that we are getting into this era of this postmodern world on what is real, what is fake. We already have all these problems with fake news and so on, where it's starting to get to a point where the normal person struggles to discern if this image was generated or not, even though we're still in a phase, in a moment where the images, when you pay attention, they look rather artificial. But I do think that as a society will come a point where it will not know, and maybe it will not even matter. And potentially also like what will happen is that there will be, let's say, like a back to the roots, or if we think also like today, right, that today we see a comeback of so products from the 70s, from the 80s, so Game Boys, be Super Nintendos, be so Walkmans and so on. So, or vinyl records, right? So where people say, hey, we want to go back to how things were. And there is like cottage industries around that. Potentially for the mainstream, it will be something where if the video that we're watching on the screen is real or not, if was generated by a tool or is really humans behind, people will not really make a difference. I think it will become so completely intertwined with our reality.
I think I'm projecting some sort of like Blade Runner view, to be honest, with all the neon lights and stuff like that. I think from a metaverse conversation, I'm trying to think about this in a way that, why do we need metaverse? Explore our own imagination? Is it to, trying to learn something new that we haven't before? I think it's almost like, to me, if AI and the video generation thing become real, and they're able to, if you combine everything that's happening from brain interfaces that, masks have built, to the studying of brain, to the ability to turn brainwave signals into code, then eventually, create some sort of virtual world, almost like text, the prompting, but using your brainwaves instead of words instead. I think if you take all of that together, I think we'll get into a world where our consciousness are literally floating all the time, where your world are created by your own consciousness. And I think that is quite exciting, simply because, even Einstein said that he hardly used 10% of his brain. And then what is yet to be discovered is the other 90%. Obviously, we're getting a little bit too sci-fi here, but I actually don't think it's so far away, just by way of, looking at where things are going. And if Sam Altman was right, in 18 months, we're going to get some sort of AGI. I'll be quite keen to see what would the AGI do, right? How will we, actually talk to an AGI? And when that AGI do come alive, they will be, your NPC in your metaverse world. Then how would that change interaction between human beings? How would that change what we do today here? So I think there are a whole host of things that we need to think about. But nonetheless, I think escaping into a virtual world has been the holy grail, and in fact was the thing that kept Nvidia alive. Right? It was the gaming industry. Long live virtual world. We'll see where this goes.
I was also thinking, Chris, about what you're saying about so the show 20 years from now. And if you think about that, one of the challenges that happen, so with current technology is always this distance, right? Like everyone is in a different location and it is never the same. So when you have face-to-face meetings, when you're still meeting with someone next to you in the same room, be on a video call or now in our podcast, there's no comparison, right? So like in-person meetings, they have still this higher degree of dynamism, of interactivity and so on. And by bridging these technologies, the metaverse with AI video generation, we'll get closer to that. We'll closer to that. And then at some point, both for us as, this podcast show producers, as well as for the audience, they will not be able maybe to notice that. And maybe we are in very different locations, very different continents. But the actual result that is produced is that we're all sitting in the room having conversations. And for the audience, this is not noticeable.
Maybe in 20 years, our podcast show will be just, included in the Neuralink chip that we will all be carrying in our brains. No, I'm just kidding. But I do have a lot of respect for the kind of technology innovation speed we had in the last, let's say, 25 to 30 years. And I'm, very curious to see where we will be in these next 20 years. And I think it's just a matter of time and waiting for AI to really start to flourish and adopt. And I think the different companies that are now pushing the boundaries are really going to make the difference. Last but not least, the last topic I wanted to talk about was an article about GE, and they actually have a spin-off that now positions itself as the supermarket for AI energy demand. And I thought that was a very interesting image, Max, to your point of being visual. And it really talks about, capturing this tailwind of AI companies and generally for the entire sector requiring so much energy. And we had a previous episode about that. I think we were saying that currently in 2022, data centers that are mostly used by AI companies take up about 3% of energy consumption in the US and predicted to be 8% by 2030. I don't necessarily want to talk about this energy topic again, but what I found very interesting, and maybe Max, you have a couple of thoughts on that, is what would be your thesis when it comes to industries that could be interesting to really ride the tailwind of AI and be creative?
Yeah, I think I had a conversation with a colleague recently about this, which is if we want to look at the entire stack, right? Anything from energy to data centers to nuclear powered to all the way up to your chips to whomever that's building those, I would say, facilities for you to house your chips, for people who are producing the metal for you to produce your chips. So you could actually think about the entire stack of things that will be going on. So far, we've spent a lot of time thinking about the application and the agentic side of things, right? And then there's also the middle layer softwares that, trying to connect your existing infrastructure to AI. And then also we've been also thinking about everything that is underneath it, really, from energy producers all the way down to the real estate developers. They're building data centers. Like all those are interesting to me, which are areas that we're not seeing yet. But because there's so much money pouring into AI, some of those monies are going to flow, right? Because when it comes to physics, it doesn't change. You still need like a house to house your chips, and you still need energy to supply your chips. You still need, the underlying mining companies to mine the right metal for you to build your chips. So all this has implication. I have not mapped it out entirely, but those are the things that I've been thinking about. There might be some opportunity to invest in. Perhaps someone will create an ETF, right, on triple levered on all those different applications. It just really depends. And for example, the earlier article, Accenture working with Indosat Group trying to deploy AI in Indonesia. The first question I have is like, where are they hosting it? Where are they buying those chips? Where are the energy coming from? So, and I think this has something to do with, what is going on in Malaysia, for example, where a lot of larger, your AWS, Google Cloud, Oracle as well, Intel are investing in Malaysia, trying to be like the hub to host a lot of those data centers, which will then give it ability to host AI on top of it. So then there are countries that are actually benefiting from it as well. So I must say it's a whole host of factors, but I was thinking a lot about what are all the secondary industries that are affected by the ascent of AI and the ascent of everything that comes with it. Does that answer the question? I would love to hear both your thoughts.
I was reflecting, Max, on what you were saying, and I was also seeing from a historical perspective in that Google DeepMind, so this research arm of Google, a few years ago when Gen AI was not en vogue, when companies doing maybe any type of AI-related activities they need to justify to the markets, they were saying, hey, we are spending all this money on DeepMind, and what we have to show is that they have helped us optimize our energy consumption for our data centers. And there was like a big trend in what do they call like agents? So like an adjacent discipline that is reinforcement learning is called. And part of like the applications that we're having is exactly that on how do we manage HVAC consumption, like in large buildings and so on, optimizing the units, keeping the cooling up and down and so on, or energy consumption in data centers. And this has been a bit forgotten or obfuscated by Gen AI agents and so on. But I do think that on one side, so sure, these AI technologies will be driving consumption. We have had stories of Microsoft, for example, buying nuclear plants in order to secure their energy supplies. But also on the other side, and this brings also like what you were saying about Accenture, is how these consultancies can bring this type of applications and innovation on things that do not seem that relevant, such as here, let's say like the HVAC units, optimizing that with agents, with these newer technologies in order to drive efficiencies.
Exactly. And Max, coming to your point, I think maybe for the next show, we should draw out that value chain and actually look at whether the driver is going up and down and discuss it. Because I think, we've been talking quite a bit about AI in general. And again, I think it's a matter of time to really, for the technology to get adopted, to find the use cases, etc. as we were speaking. But I think it would be also really interesting to understand how's the value chain behaving? What are the players along that chain that are gaining from this AI tailwind? Are we talking about, Rod, the nuclear powered energy sources? Are we talking about certain geographies like, I don't know, which US state hosts the most data centers? I forget, but they're benefiting quite a bit. And I'd be also curious to hear, maybe more downstream, what are the industries that are really benefiting from it, and what are the ones that are maybe also struggling? And I think this could be also very interesting for our audience, and also for the startups listening, to see where there are gaps and where they could go in. And maybe we can also help use AI to support us on that little analysis. Anyways, I think I want to wrap up here. We spoke about Accenture and Nvidia, their partnership on the hardware side. We spoke about the software side, and also that it's becoming more and more difficult and challenging to sell software just simply because spendings are down. We spoke about Meta's new video capability. I think, it's a race of technology, as you rightly mentioned, Rod, and let's see who gets to market first. And we'd be very happy to test out, maybe even have a fourth guest here in the show. That would be really cool. And obviously, we spoke a bit about tailwinds and companies that are really taking advantage of that. And with this, thank you so much for listening. It's always a pleasure to be meeting here every week. We will be posting the next video and podcast on Monday. If you like the show, please like us. Please leave some comments and some feedback. We always love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the week.